Welcome to Dead Air Confessions. Late at night, when the streets are empty and the signal begins to fade, people start sharing the things they never say out loud. The strange call they received, the person they saw standing outside, the night they realized they were not alone. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who carried those memories for years. Before we go on air, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a quiet, late-night feel, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions. Turn the volume down low. The line is open.
I've read enough stories about strange rules to know how these things are supposed to go. You know the kind. Someone takes a job in the middle of nowhere. The pay is suspiciously good. The employer hands them a list of instructions that sound ridiculous. Don't open a certain door after midnight. Don't respond if someone calls your name from the basement. If the lights flicker 3 times, hide under the desk. The person laughs. Then they break one of the rules. Then everything goes wrong. I always thought those stories were entertaining, but I also thought the people in them were idiots. If somebody handed me a list of creepy instructions and told me my safety depended on following them, I would either leave immediately or follow every single rule exactly. At least that was what I used to tell myself. Then my car died last month. The mechanic said the transmission was basically finished, and the repair cost was more than I had saved. Rent was due 2 weeks later. My girlfriend Maya had already been covering groceries and more than her share of the bills because my hours at work had been cut. She never complained about it, which somehow made me feel worse. Every time she said, "It's okay, we'll figure it out," I heard, "I'm paying for your problems again." I needed money. Fast, that was when I found the listing. Night watchman wanted for an old industrial building downtown. No experience required. Midnight to 6 in the morning. Mostly sitting. Occasional patrols. Pay was nearly double what I had expected for that kind of work. I should have known. The building was an old textile factory on the edge of the downtown industrial district. It had apparently been abandoned for close to 20 years before some investment company bought it. Their plan, according to the job listing, was renovation. Until construction started, they wanted somebody inside overnight to keep out squatters, vandals, and anyone trying to steal copper or equipment. Simple enough. The interview lasted less than 15 minutes. The woman who hired me was probably in her late 40s. Dark suit. Hair pulled back. No small talk. She barely looked at my GRUESOME. She asked if I could stay awake through the night. I said yes. She asked if I was comfortable being alone. I almost laughed. Being alone was probably the part of the job I liked most. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a piece of white paper. She slid it across the desk. "Read this." There were 5 rules printed on it. The first said not to acknowledge movement in the main hall. The second said that if I heard whistling, I should face the nearest wall and count slowly to 60. The third said the 3rd floor was not accessible after midnight. The fourth said I should never answer any question asked in a voice that was not my own. And the 5th said the night watchman before me might still be present. If I saw him, I was not supposed to speak to him. I read the list twice. Then I looked up at her. "Is this serious? Yes, you actually expect me to do this?" Yes, I smiled because I thought maybe she was testing me. She didn't smile back. "What happened to the last guy?" She stared at me for several seconds. Then she said, "He stopped following instructions." That should have been enough. I should have stood up, thanked her for her time, and left. Instead, I thought about my broken car, my rent, Maya paying for dinner again. When do I start? that night. My first shift was boring, almost disappointingly boring. The factory was huge, bigger inside than it looked from the street. The main floor was filled with old machinery that had been left behind when the building shut down. Conveyor systems, looms, metal tables, rolling carts. Some of it was covered with plastic sheets. Some of it was coated in thick layers of dust. The security office was near the front entrance. It had a desk, an old office chair, a small refrigerator, and a wall of monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the building. Not every camera worked. Some displayed static. Others had such poor image quality that everything looked gray. My responsibilities were simple. Check the exterior doors when I arrived. Walk the first and second floors once every 2 hours. Stay out of the third floor after midnight. Watch the cameras. Call the emergency number if someone broke in. That was it. Nothing strange happened. No whistling. No mysterious voices. No previous watchmen. No shadows crawling across the walls. By 4 in the morning, I felt stupid for taking the rules seriously. By 6, I had convinced myself they were probably some tradition passed down between security guards. Maybe the previous employees invented them to scare new people. I drove home in Maya's car and slept most of the day. The second shift started the same way. I arrived around 11:45, checked the doors, walked through the main floor. Everything looked normal. Around 3 in the morning, I noticed something. I had walked past one of the old conveyor belts earlier. I remembered it because a metal cart had been parked right beside it. Now, the conveyor belt looked different, not damaged, moved only slightly, maybe 6 inches. I stared at it. Then I noticed the cart. It was still in the same area, but the wheels were turned the opposite direction. A wooden chair near one of the worktables had also changed position. I stood there longer than I should have. Then I remembered Rule 1. Do not acknowledge movement in the main hall. I looked away. I finished my patrol. Back in the security office, I checked the cameras. Nothing, I told myself. The machinery probably shifted. Old floors, vibration from trucks outside. Maybe I was remembering the positions incorrectly. That explanation worked for one night. It didn't work by the third. A stack of pallets moved from one side of the room to another. Not a few inches. Several feet. A storage room door that I knew I had locked was open. Lights came on in empty rooms. When I walked toward them, they turned off. One camera showed a row of hanging chains swinging gently back and forth, even though the air in that room was completely still. I stopped making excuses. From then on, I kept the list of rules folded in my pocket. I read them before every patrol. The first time I heard the whistling happen during my 4th shift, I was walking down a narrow corridor on the 2nd floor. It started behind me. Soft, slow, someone whistling a tune I didn't recognize. My entire body went cold. I remembered Rule 2. Nearest wall. Count to 60. I immediately turned and faced the brick wall beside me. 1, the whistling continued. 2, it got closer. 3, my voice shook. By 20, the sound seemed to be directly behind me. I could hear someone breathing between the notes. I wanted to turn around. Every instinct told me to look. I didn't. At 37, something lightly touched the back of my jacket. I stopped breathing. The whistling stopped. For several seconds, there was only silence. I continued counting. 38. Something whispered next to my ear. Why are you facing the wall? The voice sounded like Maya. I almost answered. Then I remembered Rule 4. Do not answer any question asked in a voice that is not your own. I kept counting. At 60, the hallway was empty. After that, I stopped thinking the rules were a joke. The third floor bothered me most. There was a staircase leading up from the second floor, blocked by a heavy metal door. During the daytime, according to the woman who hired me, workers occasionally inspected it. At night, especially after midnight, I was never supposed to go upstairs. There was a camera near the stairwell and another in the third floor hallway. Most nights, the third floor camera showed almost nothing. A long corridor, closed doors, peeling paint, one broken ceiling light that flickered occasionally. I tried not to watch it. Then I saw the previous watchman. It happened during my 6th shift. I was doing a patrol through the main hall when I noticed someone standing near the far end. A man. He wore the same dark blue security uniform I was wearing. At first, I thought somebody from the company had come in without telling me. Then I remembered Rule 5. The night watchman before you may still be present. Do not speak to him. He was standing with his back toward me, completely still. I didn't say anything. I walked past him. I kept my eyes forward. The whole time, I felt him there. I expected footsteps behind me. Nothing. When I reached the end of the hall, I glanced at one of the dark windows. I could see my own reflection. And his. He had turned around. He was watching me. I didn't look directly at him. I returned to the office. On the camera, the hall was empty. The next night, I saw him again. This time, he was closer. He stood at the end of a hallway on the second floor. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking toward the staircase leading to the third floor. One arm was raised. He was pointing at it. I ignored him. That was the rule. Do not speak to him. So I didn't. The night after that, he appeared outside the security office. I was sitting at the desk when movement on one of the monitors caught my attention. He stood directly outside the office window. Same uniform. Pale face. Dark circles under his eyes. He held a piece of paper against the glass. I couldn't read what was written. He pointed at the paper. Then at the ceiling. Then at me. I sat completely still. After maybe a minute, he disappeared from the camera. I didn't hear him walk away. I checked the office window. Nobody there. The following night, he returned. This time, he was desperate. He slammed both hands against the glass. Again and again. I could see him on the monitor. His mouth was moving. I couldn't hear what he was saying. He held the same paper in one hand, pointed toward it. Then pointed at the ceiling. Then toward the monitor showing the third floor. I looked at the camera. Something was in the hallway, a dark shape. At first, I thought it was simply a shadow caused by the flickering light. Then it moved, not like a person. It moved low to the floor, then seemed to stretch upward. Its shape changed whenever the camera flickered. Long, thin, then wide. Then almost human. It was near the far end of the third floor. The previous watchman continued pounding on the glass. I didn't open the door. I didn't talk to him. I followed the rules. That became my excuse for everything. I followed the rules. I started reviewing old recordings. The security system stored several nights of footage. I checked the third floor camera first. The thing had been there before. I simply hadn't noticed. On the first night, it was barely visible at the end of the corridor. On the second, it was closer. Then closer again. One doorway at a time. Something else stood out. I checked footage of the previous watchman. The first night I saw him, he was deep in the main hall. The next night, he was closer. Then, closer. Every time the thing on the third floor moved forward, he moved forward too. I wrote down the distances. When the thing advanced one doorway, the watchman moved one section closer to my office. When it moved two, he moved two. One night, the thing didn't move at all. Neither did he. They were connected. I didn't know how. Maybe he was warning me. Maybe he was leading it. Maybe he was part of it. The rules said not to speak to him, so I didn't. The next night, he was gone. Completely, I searched every camera. Nothing. The third-floor feed showed the dark shape standing at the top of the staircase, right in front of the metal door. One long limb rested against the handle. I stared at the screen. The handle moved. Slowly, down, the camera flickered. When the image returned, the third-floor door was open. Then someone knocked on the security office door. 3 slow knocks. I stopped breathing. I checked the hallway monitor. Empty, I looked through the peephole. Nobody. Another knock. I stayed quiet. Then something slid under the office door. A piece of paper. I waited several minutes before approaching. The hallway was still empty. I picked up the paper. There was one sentence written on it. Rule 6. If he asks for help, remember that he already did. I stared at the handwriting. Something about it looked familiar. Then I realized why. It was mine. Same uneven letters. Same way I wrote the number 6. Same slant. I checked the back. Nothing. I spent the rest of the shift locked inside the office. At sunrise, everything stopped. The third-floor camera showed an empty hallway. The main hall was empty. No previous watchman. No dark thing. No movement. When my shift ended, I drove home. I almost quit. I sat outside our apartment for nearly 20 minutes trying to decide what to do. Then Maya called, asking whether I could pick up groceries on the way home. I looked at my bank balance. I went back the next night. That may be the stupidest decision I have ever made. Nothing happened for the first few hours. I checked the third-floor camera constantly. Empty. The previous watchman didn't appear. No whistling. No strange movement. I started to relax. Maybe whatever had happened was finished. Maybe the previous watchman had been trapped there because of the thing upstairs, and once it got out, both disappeared. That should not have been comforting. Somehow it was. Around 4 in the morning, I decided to review the footage from the night before. I wanted to find the moment the paper appeared under my door. The hallway camera showed nothing. At 3:17 a.m., the corridor was empty. At 3:18, still empty. At 3:19, the paper was suddenly on the floor. No hand, no shadow, nothing. Then I noticed there was also a camera inside the security office. I had never paid much attention to it. It was mounted high in the corner, showing the desk and part of the door. I pulled up the recording. At first, everything matched my memory. I was sitting at the desk, watching the monitors. The knock happened. I looked toward the door. Then the footage changed. According to the recording, I stood up. I walked to the office door. I opened it. My stomach dropped. I didn't remember doing that. On screen, I stood in the doorway for almost a full minute. The hallway outside looked empty. Then I stepped out. I was gone for 11 minutes. 11 minutes. I remembered sitting at the desk the entire time. I skipped forward. I came back. I closed the door. Then I sat down. But before sitting, I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a piece of paper. The rules. I placed them on the desk. Then I picked up a pen. I watched myself write. Rule 6, if he asks for help, remember that he already did. I stopped the video. My hands had gone numb. I looked at the paper beside me. Same words, same handwriting. I had written it. But I didn't remember. I restarted the recording. Video me continued writing. Then he stopped. Slowly, he lifted his head. He looked directly into the security camera and smiled. I almost closed the footage. Something about that smile made me feel sick. It was my face. But I have never smiled like that. Too wide, too calm. The version of me on the screen held the smile for almost 30 seconds. Then something appeared behind him, behind me. It came from the side of the frame, a dark shape slowly rising from below the desk, long limbs, thin body, head tilted sharply to one side. The same thing from the third floor. It stood directly behind my chair. Video me didn't react. Instead, he leaned backward slightly, almost like he knew it was there, almost like he was comfortable with it. Then I smiled wider. The footage ended. I sat frozen in the security office. The room around me suddenly felt much smaller. I checked behind the chair. Nothing. I checked under the desk. Nothing. Then I looked at the live feed from the office camera. There I was, sitting at the desk, watching the monitors. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then I noticed the thing standing behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. On the live feed, its head nearly touched the ceiling. Its body was too thin. Its arms hung down beside the chair. One hand rested inches from my shoulder. I stared at the monitor. Then something impossible happened. The version of me on screen smiled. I wasn't smiling. I touched my face. My mouth was closed. On screen, my lips were pulled back. Then the thing behind me leaned down. Its head moved beside mine. I still couldn't make out a face, only darkness. The monitor flickered. For half a second, the image disappeared. When it returned, the office on screen was empty. No me, no creature, just the desk. I looked down at myself. I was still there. Then I heard whistling behind me. I immediately faced the nearest wall. 1, my voice shook. 2, the whistling stopped. 3, something whispered. My voice, exactly my voice. Do you want to know what happened to the previous watchman? I kept counting. 4, my voice came again. He followed the rules too. 5, closer now. He followed every single one. 6, I wanted to cover my ears. I didn't. 7, he never spoke to me. 8, he never looked when he wasn't supposed to. 9, he never went upstairs. 10, then my voice whispered directly behind my ear. He became the rules. I almost turned around. I didn't. I counted all the way to 60. When I finished, the room was silent. I turned back toward the desk. A new piece of paper was waiting there. I knew before I read it. Rule 7. The rules do not protect the watchman. They protect the building from the watchman. I stared at the sentence until the words blurred. Then I checked the handwriting. Mine, of course. I looked at the monitors. The main hall camera showed someone standing at the far end, a security guard, same uniform, facing away from the camera. I thought it was the previous watchman. Then he turned. It was me. Not a reflection, not bad video quality. Me, the figure raised one arm, pointed toward the third floor, then toward the office, then held up a piece of paper. I understood. The previous watchman had not been trying to get inside. He had been trying to warn me. And maybe he hadn't been the previous watchman at all. Maybe he had been me. I started checking dates on the archived footage. Some files were older than the system should have stored. Weeks old. Months, years in footage dated 6 years before I ever applied for the job. I saw myself standing in the main hall. Same face. Same uniform. In another recording, I was pounding on the security office window, holding a sheet of paper, pointing toward the ceiling. In another, I was standing at the third floor door. Waiting, the dates didn't make sense. I wasn't even living in this city 6 years ago. I had never been inside this building before last month. At least I don't remember being here. That phrase keeps becoming more important. I don't remember. I don't remember writing Rule 6. I don't remember leaving the office. I don't remember smiling at the camera. Maybe there are other things I don't remember either. I called Maya. I needed to hear her voice. She answered after 3 rings. Hey, I almost cried from relief. Maya? Yeah? Can you tell me something? What? I didn't know what to ask. Finally, I said, when did I start working here? Silence. Working where? The factory. Another pause. Then she laughed nervously. What factory? My stomach tightened. My night job. You don't have a night job. I couldn't speak. She continued. You've been looking for work since your car broke down. No. What? I've been coming here every night. Coming where? I looked at the security monitors. The office feed showed an empty chair. I was standing right in front of it. The camera couldn't see me. Maya, my voice barely worked. What date is it? She told me. It was the day after my interview. According to her, less than 24 hours had passed since I first saw the job listing. I looked at the shift log beside the desk. My name appeared on 31 consecutive nights, same signature every time. I heard Maya asking if I was okay. Then another voice came through the phone. My voice, from somewhere behind her. Maya? She stopped speaking. I gripped the phone. Maya, leave the apartment. What? Go outside. Right now. Why? I heard my own voice again through the call, closer to her phone. Maya? She whispered. Are you here? No, I just heard you in the hallway. Leave. The call disconnected. I tried calling back. Nothing. Then every monitor in the office changed at once. They all showed the same room, my apartment. Maya was standing in the kitchen holding her phone. Behind her stood the dark thing. I slammed my hands against the desk. No. The creature turned toward the camera. Then every screen went black. A message appeared in white letters. Rule 4. Do not answer any question asked in a voice that is not your own. I realized what I had done. When the voice behind Maya said her name, she had answered me. Not it. Me. But maybe the rule didn't care. Maybe there was no difference anymore. The lights in the security office went out. I heard movement outside, slow footsteps, one after another. Then knocking. 3 times. I checked the peephole. A man stood outside. He looked exhausted. His uniform was torn. He had blood running from his nose. He held up a piece of paper. I knew I shouldn't speak to him. Rule 5. The previous watchman may still be present. Do not speak to him. He looked through the peephole, directly at me. Then he mouthed 2 words. Please help. I remembered Rule 6. If he asks for help, remember that he already did. I stepped away from the door. The other me started pounding, not angry. Terrified, I covered my ears. He kept hitting the glass. Then something screamed in the hallway. The pounding stopped. I waited. Silence. When I looked through the peephole again, nobody was there. The office camera suddenly came back online. The chair was empty. Then someone walked into frame. The previous watchman. He sat at the desk. He picked up a pen, started writing. I looked down. My own hand was moving. I hadn't told it to. The pen scratched across another sheet of paper. Rule 8. If you are reading this, do not finish the shift. I dropped the pen. My hand picked it up again. Rule 9. There is no morning. I tried to pull away. My arm wouldn't move. Rule 10. The new watchman always arrives before the old one leaves. A sound came from the main entrance. The electronic lock clicked. Footsteps entered the building. I watched the front camera. A young man walked inside. He looked nervous. He wore clean clothes and carried a backpack. Beside him was the woman who had hired me. She handed him a security uniform. Then, a piece of paper. 5 rules. He read them. He laughed. I knew that laugh. Not because it sounded like mine, because I remembered laughing the same way. The woman looked directly into the camera. For the first time, she smiled. Then she led him toward the security office. I tried to stand. My legs wouldn't move. The dark thing rose behind my chair. Its hands settled on my shoulders. I understood. The rules had never been meant to keep me safe. They were instructions for the process. Each rule kept me in the correct place, kept me from interfering, kept me watching, kept me afraid, kept me here long enough to become whatever the previous watchman had become. A warning nobody could listen to. A figure in the hallway, a man pounding on glass, a voice trapped between cameras. The new watchman was getting closer. The woman stopped outside the office. The door opened, but from inside the room, I didn't see anyone enter. On the monitor, I watched myself stand. I watched myself walk out into the main hall. The new guy sat down at the desk. He couldn't see me, not yet. The woman closed the door behind him. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. The dark thing followed me into the hall. I looked down. There was a piece of paper in my hand. 5 rules. No 10, the first 5 were typed. The others were written in my handwriting. Then another sentence appeared at the bottom. Rule 11, when the new watchman sees you, do not tell him the truth. He has to discover it himself. I don't know where I am anymore. I can still see the security office through the window. The new guy is sitting inside, looking at his phone. He hasn't noticed me. Behind him, on one of the monitors, something is moving on the 3rd floor. One doorway closer. I want to warn him. I want to bang on the glass. I want to tell him to leave. But I know what the rules say. And worse, I know what happens if I break them. Because something is standing behind me. Something tall and dark. Waiting, the new watchman just looked up. He saw movement in the main hall. Me, I watched him reach into his pocket. He pulled out the piece of paper. He read Rule 1. Do not acknowledge movement in the main hall. Then he looked away. Exactly like I did. Exactly like the watchman before me. Whoever that was. I think I finally understand why I could see myself in recordings from years ago. Maybe there never was a previous watchman. Maybe there has only ever been one. Maybe the building doesn't replace us. It repeats us. Different nights. Different versions. Same person. Same rules. Same mistakes. Somewhere, another version of me is probably sitting at an interview desk right now. The woman is sliding a piece of paper toward him. He's reading it. He's thinking about money, about Maya, about rent. He's telling himself that if the rules are real, he'll follow them. He'll be smarter than all those idiots in the stories. I wish I could tell him. Following the rules is exactly what they want. But he wouldn't listen. I know he wouldn't. I didn't. The thing behind me just placed a hand on my shoulder. The new watchman is checking the monitors. He's starting his first patrol soon. The main hall is already changing. A conveyor belt moved a few inches. A chair turned around. He noticed. He looked confused. Then he looked away. Good, that means it has started. I can feel myself fading whenever he follows a rule. Every correct decision makes me less solid. Soon I'll become nothing more than movement in the corner of his eye. Then a figure at the end of a hallway. Then a warning behind glass. Eventually, I'll disappear completely. And he'll take my place. Maybe that is what the building eats. Not bodies. Time, choices, versions of people. It keeps making us repeat the same nights until there is nothing left except the rules. I'm standing outside the security office now. The new watchman hasn't seen me yet. I'm holding a piece of paper against the glass. I wrote one final sentence. I don't know whether he'll ever read it. Maybe he isn't supposed to. Maybe that is why every warning becomes another rule. But I have to try. The sentence says, "There is no safe way to finish this job." The new watchman just looked up. He sees me. His eyes widened. I pointed at the paper, then at the ceiling, then at him. He reached into his pocket. He's reading Rule 5 now. The night watchman before you may still be present. Do not speak to him. He's looking away. Of course he is. I did the same thing. Behind him, the third-floor monitor flickered. The dark shape moved another doorway closer. I started pounding on the glass. He won't open the door. He thinks he's being careful. He thinks he's following the rules. And from somewhere behind me, in a voice that sounds exactly like mine, something has started to whistle.
The Gettysburg Watchers. When I was 13 years old, my family took a trip to Gettysburg to visit the famous battlefield. It was one of those family vacations where we wanted to see places that were important to history, and Gettysburg was at the top of the list. I remember being excited, but mostly because I enjoyed exploring new places. At that age, I didn't know every detail of the battle or fully appreciate how significant the location was. To me, it was simply a place I'd heard about in school, somewhere with an incredible amount of history behind it. The drive there felt completely normal. We spent hours on the road, talking, looking out the windows, and asking the usual questions about how much farther we had to go. Eventually, we reached the area around the battlefield and began driving through the quiet country roads that surrounded it. The scenery immediately stood out. There were wide open fields stretching into the distance, old split-rail fences running alongside the roads, patches of trees, and gently rolling hills. Even without knowing much about history, the landscape felt different somehow. It was peaceful, almost unusually quiet, as though time had slowed down there. As we continued driving, I found myself looking out the passenger side window. That's when I saw them. Standing along the fence lines were soldiers. There wasn't just one. There were several of them, spaced out along the old wooden fences, as if they had been waiting there for a very long time. I remember seeing them with incredible clarity. Some stood casually with their arms resting on the fence posts. Others leaned against the rails as though they were taking a brief break. One detail has stayed with me more than anything else. A few of them appeared to be chewing on pieces of straw. It wasn't dramatic. They weren't marching. They weren't fighting. They weren't looking at me. They simply stood there, quietly occupying the landscape as naturally as if they belonged there. Nothing about the scene felt rushed or frightening. It was strangely calm. At 13 years old, I didn't immediately think, "I'm seeing ghosts." Instead, I simply stared. The image felt completely real. They looked solid enough that I didn't question what I was seeing in that moment. It wasn't until we had driven farther down the road that I began wondering why nobody else seemed to be reacting. No one in the car said anything. My parents kept talking normally. The conversation continued exactly as it had before. I glanced around, half expecting someone else to point toward the fence. No one did. I looked back outside. The soldiers were gone. I never mentioned what I'd seen. I honestly wasn't sure how to explain it. Part of me wondered whether I had imagined the entire thing. Maybe I'd been thinking about the battlefield before we arrived. Maybe my imagination had filled the landscape with scenes from the past. It seemed like the most reasonable explanation, so I kept it to myself. The trip continued. We explored Gettysburg like countless other visitors do. We walked around the historic sites, looked at monuments, and learned more about what had happened there generations earlier. Eventually, we went home. As the years passed, I thought about that drive from time to time. The memory never really faded. If anything, it remained unusually vivid. I could still picture the fence lines, I could still remember the relaxed way the soldiers stood. Most of all, I could still see the ones chewing on pieces of straw. It was such an ordinary little detail that it made the memory feel strangely convincing. At the same time, I remained skeptical of my own experience. Memory isn't perfect. People remember things differently as they get older. I figured my mind had probably mixed history, imagination, and childhood curiosity into one unusually realistic memory. For years, that explanation seemed good enough. Then, several years later, something happened that completely caught me off guard. My dad and I were talking about that old family trip to Gettysburg. It wasn't even a conversation about ghosts. We were simply reminiscing about places we'd visited over the years. Eventually, Gettysburg came up. As we talked about the battlefield, my dad casually mentioned something he'd experienced during the drive into the area. His tone changed slightly as he began describing it. He said that while we were driving, he'd seen soldiers standing along the fences. I remember feeling my attention lock onto every word he said. He described them quietly standing beside the fence posts. Some appeared to be leaning against the rails. Others looked completely relaxed. He wasn't describing an active battlefield. He wasn't talking about dramatic visions of combat. He described almost exactly what I remembered seeing. For a moment, I didn't even know how to respond. I had never told him what I'd seen that day. Not once. I'd kept the experience entirely to myself ever since I was 13 years old. There was no reason for his description to sound so familiar. When he finished telling his story, I finally admitted that I'd seen something too. I described the soldiers I remembered standing along the fence lines as we drove into Gettysburg. I mentioned the men leaning casually against the fence. Then I told him about the detail that had stayed with me all those years. Some of them had seemed to be chewing on straw. The more we talked, the more surprising the conversation became. Neither of us had realized the other had experienced anything unusual during that trip. We had both quietly carried the memory for years without ever mentioning it. I don't know exactly what my father thought about it afterward. I know it surprised both of us. Neither of us tried to convince the other that what we'd seen had definitely been supernatural. Neither of us claimed to have all the answers. We simply realized that we'd had remarkably similar experiences during the same drive. Even now, I still don't know what happened. Gettysburg is a place with an extraordinary history. Millions of people visit every year because of what happened there. Knowing that history, it's easy to imagine how a person's mind might fill in the empty fields with images from the past. Maybe that's exactly what happened. Maybe our expectations influenced what we thought we saw. Maybe the landscape itself encourages that kind of imagination. Those explanations seem entirely possible. At the same time, it's difficult for me to ignore one simple fact. I never told my father about what I saw. He never told me about what he experienced. Years passed before either of us mentioned it. Yet, when the subject finally came up, our memories shared striking similarities. I still consider myself a fairly rational person. Whenever I hear stories about haunted places, I usually assume there's an ordinary explanation. Most experiences can probably be explained through coincidence, perception, suggestion, or the strange ways memory changes over time. I don't think every unexplained event has to be paranormal. This one, though, has always stayed with me. Not because it proved anything. Not because I believe I have evidence of ghosts, but because I have never been able to fully explain why my father and I remembered seeing something so similar without ever discussing it beforehand. Maybe there is a perfectly logical explanation that neither of us has considered. Maybe the power of history, expectation, and memory can produce experiences that feel astonishingly real. Or maybe some places hold on to the past in ways we don't yet understand. I honestly don't know. All I know is that whenever I think back to that family trip, I don't first remember the monuments, the museums, or even the battlefield itself. I remember looking out the car window as we slowly drove into Gettysburg and seeing quiet soldiers standing along the old fence lines, some leaning against the weathered posts, others calmly chewing on pieces of straw, as though they had simply paused for a moment and were waiting for something that had ended long before we arrived. Whether they were only memories created by my imagination or something far more difficult to explain is a question I've never been able to answer. Even after all these years, that quiet moment remains one of the clearest memories from that trip, made even stranger by discovering much later that my father remembered seeing something remarkably similar without either of us ever speaking about it beforehand. Watching from the basement. When I was still living with my parents, I worked fairly late hours. It wasn't unusual for me to come home long after everyone else had already gone to bed, and sometimes I'd arrive to find the entire house completely empty. I had grown used to it. After a while, walking into a dark, quiet house late at night became part of my routine. I'd unlock the front door, step inside, and make my way through the kitchen before settling in for the night. It was something I'd done so many times that I barely thought about it anymore. The layout of the house was simple. As soon as you came through the entrance, you walked into the kitchen. To reach the rest of the house, you had to pass the doorway leading to the basement stairs. The staircase descended into a dark basement that wasn't visible from the top, unless you deliberately looked down. Most nights, I didn't. I'd walk right past it without giving it a second thought. One night, though, everything felt different. I came home from work late, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The house was completely empty. No television, no music, no conversations coming from another room, just silence. I remember closing the door behind me and walking through the kitchen exactly as I always did. As I passed the basement stairs, something caught my attention. There was movement, very slow movement. At first, I only noticed it from the corner of my eye. It wasn't quick enough to startle me immediately. It was almost the opposite. Something was shifting so slowly that it took my brain a moment to recognize that anything was moving at all. I stopped walking. Then I turned toward the staircase. At the bottom of the stairs, staring directly up at me, was a face. Even now, it's difficult to describe, because it didn't resemble any person I've ever seen. The first thing that struck me was its size. It was enormous. The face alone looked roughly the size of a human torso. That was what immediately felt wrong. Nothing with a face that large should have been standing at the bottom of my parents' basement stairs. Its skin looked brown and deeply wrinkled, not just aged, almost dried out somehow. Its features were fixed on me. It wasn't looking around. It wasn't hiding. It was simply staring. Its mouth slowly opened, then slowly closed, opened again, closed again, over and over. No sound came from it. It didn't growl. It didn't breathe loudly. It didn't speak. It simply watched me while its mouth continued that slow, repetitive motion. I have no idea how long we looked at each other. Probably only a few seconds. It felt much longer. The strange thing is that I didn't scream. I didn't run. I didn't even say anything. I think my brain simply failed to process what I was seeing. Instead, I did something that still seems bizarre when I think about it now. I turned away and kept walking. Almost automatically, it was as if my mind had decided that continuing toward the living room was somehow more manageable than trying to understand what I'd just seen. I remember my heart racing afterward, but during those first moments, I felt almost numb, like I was functioning on instinct instead of conscious thought. Once I reached the other room, the reality of what had happened finally started catching up with me. I couldn't stop thinking about the face. Every detail replayed in my mind: the impossible size, the brown, wrinkled skin, the way it silently opened and closed its mouth, the fact that it had been staring directly at me. I knew one thing immediately. I didn't want to be alone. The house suddenly felt enormous. Every quiet room seemed unsettling. Every creak made me look toward the hallway. I had absolutely no desire to go anywhere near the basement staircase again. So I called a friend. I explained that I really didn't want to spend the night alone and asked if they could come over. Thankfully, they agreed. Just having another person in the house made me feel a little more grounded. I never told them every detail immediately, because saying it out loud somehow made it feel even stranger. Even hearing myself describe it sounded unbelievable. Before that night, there had already been things about the house that made me uneasy. Nothing I could actually see, just sounds. The basement in particular always seemed to produce noises that didn't make much sense. Every so often, I'd hear what sounded like something bouncing off the basement walls. Not a single thump, more like an object striking one wall, then another, then another. The sounds echoed upward through the staircase. Each time it happened, I'd eventually work up the courage to go downstairs and check. Nothing was ever out of place. No boxes had fallen. No tools had rolled across the floor. No shelves had collapsed. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Eventually, I started convincing myself the noises had ordinary explanations. Maybe the house was settling. Maybe pipes were making strange sounds. Maybe something stored in the basement shifted naturally. Whatever the cause was, I never found evidence of anything unusual. Those sounds were unsettling, but they were still just sounds. The face was different. That was the only thing I ever actually saw. I've spent years trying to come up with a logical explanation. Fatigue, lighting, mistaken perception, shadows. I've considered all of them. Coming home late after work certainly doesn't make anyone more alert. Maybe my brain misinterpreted something sitting in the basement. Maybe darkness distorted what I thought I was looking at. Maybe there was a perfectly ordinary explanation that simply wasn't obvious in the moment. I honestly don't know. What makes it difficult is how vivid the memory still is. I don't remember vague shapes. I remember details: the wrinkled skin, the enormous size, the slow movement of its mouth, the way it remained completely silent. Most of all, I remember the feeling that something was looking back at me. Eventually, I moved out of my parents' house. Life changed. I stopped thinking about that night quite as often. Still, every time I visit, one part of the house immediately brings the memory back. The kitchen, specifically the basement stairs. The layout hasn't changed. To do almost anything in the kitchen, you naturally end up turning your back toward the staircase. Whether you're making coffee, washing dishes, or preparing food, you're standing there, facing the counters, while the basement entrance sits quietly behind you. I still don't like it. Even now, I catch myself wanting to glance over my shoulder. Not constantly, just enough to reassure myself that nothing is standing there. It's an uncomfortable feeling that has never completely disappeared. I've never seen that face again. Nothing remotely similar has happened since. The strange noises in the basement never escalated into anything I could verify. The face remains the only experience I can't explain. If someone else told me this story, I'd probably search for a rational explanation. before accepting anything supernatural. I'd wonder whether exhaustion played a role. I'd question how memory changes over time. I'd think about the tricks darkness can play on the human mind. Those explanations are all possible. Maybe one of them is correct. I genuinely hope one of them is. But no matter how many possibilities I consider, I still come back to the same memory. Coming home after work. Walking through an empty house. Passing the basement stairs. Noticing something moving slowly in the darkness. Turning to look. And seeing an impossibly large, brown, deeply wrinkled face silently staring up at me while its mouth opened and closed without making a single sound. I don't know what I saw that night, and I don't claim to have an answer. All I know is that it remains the only experience from that house that I can't comfortably explain away. The strange sounds in the basement eventually became something I could ignore, but that silent face has stayed with me for years. Even now, whenever I'm alone in my parents' house, I still find myself avoiding the basement stairs whenever I can. And if I have to stand in the kitchen with my back to them, I almost always end up looking over my shoulder, just to make sure nothing is quietly watching from below. Shadow at the bedside. This story didn't happen to me. It happened to my granddad, and it's the only reason I've ever seriously considered that some things can't be easily explained. My granddad was never the type of person to believe in ghosts, spirits, or anything paranormal. If someone told him they had seen a ghost, he'd usually dismiss it without giving it much thought. He was practical, logical, and always looked for an ordinary explanation before anything else. That's what makes this story so difficult for me to ignore. It wasn't told by someone who wanted to believe. It was told by someone who spent most of his life believing there was no such thing. The experience happened after my grandma suffered a stroke. It changed life for both of them, almost overnight. The stroke left her with very limited mobility, and she needed constant care while she recovered. Because of that, she spent time in a care home where she could receive the support and rehabilitation she needed. It was an incredibly difficult period for the whole family. My granddad hated seeing her there. More than anything, he wanted to bring her home and look after her himself. He wanted her somewhere familiar, somewhere comfortable, where he could be the one taking care of her every day. Eventually, that became possible. When she returned home, they made several changes around the house to make life easier for her. One of those changes was surprisingly simple. They swapped sides of the bed. For their entire marriage, they had always slept on the same sides, but now it made more sense for my grandma to sleep nearest the bedroom door. That way, she would have easier access to the bathroom, and it would be simpler for my granddad to help her if she needed anything during the night. It was a small adjustment, but an important one. Their nightly routine changed with it. Because my grandma occasionally needed assistance, they developed the habit of leaving the bedroom door slightly open. The hallway light stayed on throughout the night. That way, if either of them woke up, there was enough light filtering into the room to see without needing to switch on a lamp. One night, sometime after she had come home, my granddad woke up unexpectedly. The room was quiet. The only light came from the hallway, spilling softly through the partially open bedroom door. At first, everything seemed normal. Then he noticed something that instantly made him sit up from where he was lying. It looked as though my grandma was sitting upright on the edge of the bed. His first reaction wasn't fear. It was concern, given everything she'd been through. His immediate thought was that she had somehow managed to get herself up and might be trying to stand or walk on her own. He worried she could fall. Without hesitating, he started moving toward her side of the bed to help. As he got closer, something didn't look right. The shape he had seen wasn't actually my grandma sitting up. She was still lying flat in bed, fast asleep. What he had mistaken for her was something else entirely. Hovering over her was a dark shadow. He described it as a black shape positioned above her bed, not attached to anything, not cast by furniture, simply a dark figure hanging over her while she slept. For a brief moment, he just stared. Then he took another step closer. As he approached, the shadow began to move. It didn't rush. It didn't suddenly disappear. Instead, it drifted away from the bed. It moved slowly toward the bedroom door. My granddad watched it cross the room in silence. It reached the doorway. Then it vanished. There was no sound, no flash of light, no dramatic ending. It simply disappeared as it reached the open door. My grandma never woke up. She remained asleep the entire time. My granddad stood there, looking at her, trying to understand what he had just witnessed. He checked on her immediately. She was fine, still sleeping peacefully. Nothing else seemed unusual about the room. The hallway light was still on. The bedroom looked exactly the way it always did, only the shadow was gone. For someone who had never believed in ghosts or anything paranormal, the experience deeply unsettled him. He wasn't the type of person to exaggerate stories. He wasn't interested in convincing people that supernatural things existed. In fact, he was probably the last person anyone in the family would expect to tell a story like that. That's one of the reasons it stayed with everyone who heard it. He genuinely couldn't explain what he'd seen. He didn't claim it was definitely a ghost. He didn't insist it had been some kind of spirit. He simply described exactly what happened as he remembered it. He woke up. He thought my grandma was sitting on the edge of the bed. As he got closer, he realized she had never moved at all. A dark shadow had been hanging over her instead. When he approached, it quietly moved away and disappeared through the bedroom doorway. That was the entire story. Nothing else happened afterward. There were no more sightings, no strange voices, no unexplained events that followed. My grandma continued recovering, and life gradually settled into a routine again. As far as I know, my granddad never experienced anything similar before or after that night. Even now, I don't know what to make of it. There are certainly possible explanations. People can wake suddenly and briefly misinterpret what they're seeing in low light. Sleep inertia, unusual shadows, and the transition between sleeping and waking can sometimes create surprisingly vivid experiences. Munkel. Those explanations make sense. At the same time, they don't completely explain why the experience affected my granddad so deeply. Munkel. He wasn't someone who frightened easily. He wasn't interested in ghost stories. If anything, he usually dismissed them. For him to quietly admit that he had seen something he couldn't explain carried far more weight than if the story had come from someone who already believed in the paranormal. I've often wondered whether the stress of caring for my grandma after her stroke played a role. He worried about her constantly. He was exhausted much of the time. Anyone in that situation would be. Perhaps his mind briefly turned a combination of darkness and concern into something that wasn't really there. That's entirely possible. Or perhaps he witnessed something that simply doesn't fit neatly into any explanation. I honestly don't know. All I know is that this story has remained in our family for years, not because anyone insists it proves the existence of ghosts, but because it came from the one person who would have been the first to dismiss a story like it. Whenever I think about it, I picture that quiet bedroom with the hall light spilling through the partly open door, My grandma asleep beneath the blankets, and my granddad hurrying around the bed because he believed she needed his help. Instead, he found a silent, dark shadow hanging over her, one that calmly drifted toward the doorway and disappeared before his eyes. Whether it was a trick of the light, the mind playing strange games in the moments between sleep and wakefulness, or something far more difficult to explain, it's a memory he carried with him for the rest of his life, and one that none of us in the family have ever completely forgotten. We will get back to the next confession in a moment. If you are new here, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more real stories from people who experienced something they still cannot explain. Your support helps keep these late-night broadcasts alive. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has unsettled you the most so far. Now, let's return to the signal. Just beyond the headlights. Back in 2010, I was in my first year of college and working at Taco Bell to help pay the bills. It wasn't glamorous, but I enjoyed the job, mostly because of the people I worked with. One of them was my manager. Over time, we became good friends, and we're still friends today. Around that time, his truck finally gave up on him. It completely broke down, and until he could get it repaired, he didn't have a way to get home after our late shifts. Since we usually closed together anyway, I started driving him home whenever we worked the closing shift. It became part of our routine. We'd finish cleaning the restaurant, lock everything up, climb into my car, and head out through the quiet streets while everyone else seemed to be asleep. Most nights were uneventful. We'd talk about work, college, random life problems, or whatever happened to be on the radio. One station we listened to quite a bit was Coast to Coast AM. If you've ever listened to it, you know it covers all kinds of unusual topics: ghosts, UFOs, unexplained sightings, conspiracy theories, and pretty much anything mysterious. Whether we believed everything we heard or not, it was entertaining, especially during long drives home in the middle of the night. One particular night still stands out in my memory. We had just finished closing the restaurant and were driving through a suburban neighborhood on the way to his house. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning. The streets were completely empty. There were no pedestrians, almost no traffic. The most of the houses were dark, and the entire neighborhood had that strange stillness that only seems to exist in the early hours before dawn. Because the roads were so empty, I had my high beams on. They stretched far ahead of us, lighting up the road and everything directly in front of the car. We weren't talking much. The radio was playing quietly in the background while we both looked ahead. Then, at almost exactly the same moment, we both noticed something. Just beyond the reach of the headlights, there was the outline of a man. He wasn't standing directly in the road. He was just outside the brightest part of the light, close enough to see clearly but still surrounded by darkness. Neither of us said anything immediately. We were both simply looking at him. As the car continued moving forward, the figure stepped into the path of the headlights. For the briefest moment, I expected the light to fully illuminate him. Instead, he disappeared, not by walking away, not by running, not by moving behind a tree or another car. He simply wasn't there anymore. One instant he was visible, the next instant there was nothing. The road ahead was completely empty. I instinctively glanced over at my manager. At the exact same moment, he turned and looked at me. Neither of us needed to ask the obvious question. The expressions on our faces answered it. We had both seen the same thing. There was a long second where neither of us spoke. It wasn't because we were too frightened to talk. It was because we were silently confirming that the other person had witnessed exactly what had just happened. Finally, one of us asked something along the lines of, "You saw that too?" The answer came immediately. Neither of us had imagined it alone. That was the part that stayed with me. If I'd been by myself, I probably would have convinced myself there was a perfectly ordinary explanation. Maybe I'd mistaken a shadow for a person. Maybe fatigue after work had affected my perception. Maybe the lighting had created some strange illusion. Driving late at night after a long shift can certainly play tricks on your eyes. But I wasn't alone. My manager looked up at exactly the same time I did. He watched the figure enter the headlights. He watched it disappear. We both reacted independently before either of us said a word. That made it much harder to dismiss. The strange thing is that the experience itself wasn't dramatic. There wasn't any loud noise. The figure didn't approach the car. It didn't wave. It didn't speak. Nothing chased us. There was no overwhelming sense of fear. It was almost absurdly simple. A man-shaped figure standing just beyond the reach of the headlights. A step forward. Gone. It almost felt like someone playing a game of peekaboo. 1 second there. 1 second not. We kept driving. There wasn't much else we could do. I don't even remember whether we turned the radio down afterward. I mostly remember replaying the image in my mind while trying to understand what we'd witnessed. The roads remained empty. Nothing else unusual happened during the drive. I dropped my manager off at home and eventually went back to my own place, but I found myself thinking about it long after the night had ended. Over the years, I've had plenty of other experiences that people would probably describe as paranormal. Some of them were stranger. Some were much creepier. A few were far more difficult to explain. Yet this one has always stood out for a different reason. It was so straightforward. There wasn't much room for interpretation. We both looked up. We both saw the same figure. We both watched it disappear. That's it. No complicated sequence of events. No uncertainty about whether I'd been alone. No delayed realization. It happened in front of both of us at exactly the same time. Because of that, it's probably the easiest experience I have when someone asks why I sometimes hesitate before dismissing stories about unexplained sightings. I'm still a fairly rational person. I think there are usually ordinary explanations for extraordinary claims. People misinterpret shadows. Fatigue affects perception. The human brain naturally tries to recognize familiar shapes, especially in poor lighting. I know all of that. Those explanations make sense, and maybe one of them applies here too. It's entirely possible. At the same time, I can't ignore the fact that there were two of us in the car. Neither of us suggested what we'd seen before the other reacted. Neither of us had time to influence the other's memory. We simply looked at the same spot at the same moment and watched the same impossible thing happen. I still don't know what it was. Maybe there was a perfectly ordinary explanation hidden somewhere in the darkness that neither of us noticed. Maybe our brains briefly interpreted the same visual information in the same unusual way, or maybe it was something I'll never be able to explain. I honestly don't know. All I know is that whenever I think back to those late-night drives after closing Taco Bell, I remember the quiet suburban streets, the empty roads stretching ahead beneath the high beams, coast to coast and drifting softly through the speakers, and that lone figure standing just outside the light. For one brief moment, it seemed completely real, waiting at the edge of the darkness until the headlights finally reached it. Then, as if someone had simply erased it from the road, it vanished without a trace. It wasn't the strangest thing I've ever experienced, and it certainly wasn't the scariest, but it remains the clearest, simplest, and hardest to dismiss unexplained sighting I've ever had.
Dude, who or what is in my freaking house? I know how stupid that sounds, but I genuinely don't know what else to call it. The only reason I haven't called the police yet is because whatever broke into my parents' house is currently fighting for its life in the guest bathroom, and as terrified as I am, I have enough basic respect not to attack someone while they're in the middle of losing a war against the toilet. That probably needs some explanation. I'm house-sitting for my parents while they're on a cruise. I recently got laid off from my job, so when they asked if I could stay at their place for a while, I said yes. I obviously wasn't thrilled about being unemployed, but I figured I might as well make myself useful. Their house is a simple one-story place with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The layout matters, so I'm going to explain it as clearly as possible. There's a deck toward the back of the house with a large sliding glass door. That door opens into one big shared area containing the kitchen, dining space, and living room. It's all sort of pushed together into one open room. I didn't design the place, so don't blame me. Past that area is a hallway. There are 2 guest bedrooms along it. I'm staying in the first one. The second guest bedroom is farther down, and immediately beside it is the main bathroom. At the very end of the hall is my parents' bedroom, which has its own private bathroom. The front door is positioned near the hallway, almost directly visible from my parents' bedroom. It's only a few feet away from the guest room I'm sleeping in. One more detail is important. Most of the house is carpeted. The kitchen, bathrooms, front entrance, and little dining section have hard flooring, but the living room, bedrooms, and hallway are carpet. Remember that. This started about 2.5 hours ago. I had already gotten ready for bed. I was under the blankets, watching YouTube videos on my phone, and slowly falling asleep. Then, I heard the crash. Not a small noise. Glass exploded somewhere in the back of the house. I heard pieces scatter across the floor, followed by a heavy thud like a rock or some other object had landed inside. I sat straight up. For maybe 2 seconds, I didn't move. Then I heard a voice. Uh-oh. I wish I could explain the voice better. It was human. Definitely human enough to understand. But it sounded forced. Imagine someone who is furious trying to sound cheerful. Their words might technically sound happy, but underneath them you can hear the anger they're failing to hide. It was like that. Except I couldn't tell what emotion was underneath. I immediately got out of bed as quietly as possible and pressed my ear against the bedroom door. Thankfully, I always lock bedroom doors when I sleep. I know that sounds paranoid, especially when I'm staying inside my own parents' house, but it's a habit I've had for years. For once, I was grateful for it. At first, I assumed someone had thrown a rock through the sliding door and climbed inside. A burglar, a drug addict, some random idiot. Then I heard it walking. That was when the situation stopped making sense. On the kitchen floor, normal footsteps should sound like shoes against wood or tile. These didn't. Every step sounded like someone slowly crushing styrofoam packaging in their hands. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I could track its movement by listening. Sometimes the sound came closer to my room. Then, farther away. It moved into the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator open. There was a pause. Then the thing said, "Who buys 3 gallons of skim milk?" Excuse me? I actually remember thinking that. Someone had broken into the house, and they were criticizing my parents' milk choices. Rude, mind your own business. I stayed completely silent. Then I heard metal bending. Not rattling, bending, a long, high-pitched squeal followed by a deep grinding noise. I think it bent the refrigerator door, maybe ripped it partly off. I'm not sure because there is absolutely no chance I'm opening my bedroom door to confirm it. A few seconds later, I heard a paper bag crinkle. Ooh, Taco Bell. My heart sank for an entirely different reason. That was my Taco Bell. I had saved half a burrito for later. Apparently, breaking into houses wasn't enough. This thing was also a thief. I heard more rustling. Then a metallic slam. Something heavy hit the kitchen floor. I'm guessing the fridge door finally came off. Then the footsteps started again, crunching styrofoam across the hard floor. The sound moved toward the living room, and as soon as it reached the carpet, it changed. Instead of styrofoam, every step sounded like a handful of coins being shaken inside a glass jar. Clink, clink, clink. Pause, clink, clink, clink. I remember staring at the bottom of my bedroom door, waiting to see a shadow pass. Nothing did. The coin sound moved into the living room, then stopped. I guessed it had sat down on the couch. Grub time. Then it started eating my burrito. I really wish I were making this up. The eating noises were awful. Imagine a soaking wet mop being slapped repeatedly against the tile floor. That was approximately what it sounded like. Wet smacking. Squelching, occasional swallowing noises that seemed much too deep. I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping my phone, trying to decide what to do. Call the cops? Text someone? Try to escape through the window? The problem was that whoever this was had entered through the back and was now sitting in the living room, which was between me and most exits. I watched the time on my phone. About 30 minutes passed. Eventually, the eating stopped. Silence. I thought maybe it had fallen asleep. Then it spoke. Why is your heartbeat so loud? My entire body went cold. I covered my mouth instinctively. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The thing continued. Tachycardia is a symptom of many things, including hyperthyroidism, heart problems, fear, or anemia. A pause. Let's see. Then I heard sniffing. Not normal sniffing. It sounded like a dog smelling cold winter air. Deep pulls through the nose. Again, again, again. Then it said, nope. Plenty of red blood cells. My stomach dropped. You do have a spike in adrenaline, though. Another pause. Care to tell me why? The coin sound started again. Clink, clink, clink. Closer, clink, clink, clink. Closer, I slowly backed away from the door. The sound entered the hallway. Then stopped directly outside my room. Something began breathing, except I don't think it actually needed air. It sounded like something practicing how to breathe because it had seen humans do it. Short inhale, short exhale, short inhale, short exhale. Too fast, too excited, almost playful. I stood beside my bed holding the heaviest thing I could find, which was a metal lamp. I watched the door handle. It didn't move. The breathing continued. I started timing it because I needed something to focus on. 5 minutes, then 10, then 15. The breathing became faster. Soon it wasn't even individual breaths anymore. It became a buzzing sound, like a large insect vibrating outside my door. I thought the handle would turn at any second. Then everything stopped. Complete silence. I waited. A few seconds later, I heard what sounded like several cats hissing at once. The noise came from directly outside. Then the thing yelled, "Oh, dang it." Its voice sounded genuinely panicked. "Where's the bathroom?" The coin sound suddenly raced away. Fast. Much faster than before. It moved down the hallway. A bathroom door slammed. Then I heard the most normal sound this thing had made all night. It was using the toilet. I don't think I need to explain the details. Everyone knows what it sounds like when somebody is having a truly terrible bathroom experience. There was groaning, straining, a few noises that honestly made me feel bad for it. Then the toilet flushed. 10 minutes later, it happened again. Then, again, same pattern. Almost exactly 10-minute intervals. It has been doing that ever since. I'm still in the bedroom. The door is still locked. I haven't called the police. Part of the reason is fear. Another part is that I genuinely don't understand what the police are supposed to do if this thing can hear my heartbeat through a wall and somehow determine my red blood cell count by smelling me. Also, I don't want an officer walking into the house and getting killed because I underestimated whatever this is. So I started writing everything down, mostly because if something happens to me, I want there to be some record, but also because I need advice. During its bathroom battle, the thing has been saying random sentences, not talking to anyone, just occasionally shouting questions from inside. The first one was, is this my blood or theirs? I nearly called the police after that. Then, maybe 15 minutes later, it asked, is it true helium will be gone in the next century? No context. Nothing before or after. A little later, why do my children stop crying? That one bothered me more than the blood question. Then, does Mickey Mouse wear socks? I don't know. I don't care. I'm trapped in a bedroom while some impossible creature destroys my parents' bathroom and asks questions like a broken search engine. For the last 20 minutes, things have gotten quieter. The flushing stopped. I thought maybe it had died. Then, I heard it whispering. I couldn't understand most of what it was saying. I pressed my ear against the door. That was probably stupid. I caught one sentence. I knew the burrito smelled wrong. Honestly, good serves you right. Then I heard scratching. Not from the bathroom. From inside the wall beside my bed. I moved away immediately. The scratching stopped. A few minutes later, the bathroom toilet flushed again. So whatever is in there apparently hasn't moved. At least, I don't think it has. I'm starting to wonder if there is more than one. I really hope there isn't. About 10 minutes ago, I finally texted my parents. I didn't tell them everything because I didn't want to ruin their cruise with, hey, an unidentified nightmare broke your refrigerator and is currently destroying your plumbing. I just asked whether they had given anyone permission to enter the house. My mom responded almost immediately. No. Then she asked why. I didn't answer yet. I was typing a response when something knocked on my bedroom door. 3 light taps. I stopped breathing. Then my mom's voice came from the other side. Honey? I nearly answered. My mother is on a cruise. I looked at her text message still open on my phone. Another knock. Honey, open the door. It sounded exactly like her. Same voice. Same little way she says honey when she's worried. I stayed silent. Then the voice changed, not gradually. It simply became the same forced, cheerful voice from earlier. Worth trying. I almost dropped my phone. The coin sounds moved away. Apparently it had left the bathroom. I never heard the bathroom door open. That is a detail I really don't like. The footsteps went back toward the kitchen. Then, silence. A few minutes later, I heard the refrigerator, or what remains of it. Something metal scraped across the floor. Then the thing said, you really should clean behind this. Again, rude, I heard more rummaging. Then it started humming. I don't recognize the song. The humming keeps stopping every few seconds, like it forgets what tune it was doing and starts a different one. I've been thinking about escaping through the bedroom window. The problem is the window faces the side yard. From there, I could probably run toward the street without passing the kitchen. But I'm on the fence about making noise. Opening it could alert whatever is outside or inside. I also don't know whether it can hear other things as clearly as my heartbeat. If it knows where I am already, then maybe it doesn't matter. Another strange thing happened 5 minutes ago. My phone battery went from 68% to 11. Instantly, no warning. I thought the display had glitched. Then it dropped to 9. 8, 7, I plugged it into the charger. Nothing happened. The charging symbol appeared, but the percentage kept decreasing. 6, 5, then the thing in the kitchen said, "Stop feeding that." I unplugged the phone. The battery stayed at 5%. So apparently it knows what my phone is doing too. I'm writing as fast as I can. There are more sounds now. The kitchen faucet turned on. Then something started laughing. Not evil laughter. More like someone suddenly understanding a joke. Oh, it laughed again. That makes sense. Then silence. I heard the styrofoam footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They became coin sounds when it reached the carpet. Clink, clink, clink coming down the hallway. Toward me. It stopped outside the bedroom. I'm sitting on the floor against the far wall. My phone is at 4%. The thing hasn't knocked. It has been standing there for maybe 3 minutes. I can hear the fake breathing again. Very slow this time. In, out, then it spoke. You were right not to call them. I don't know how it knew what I was considering. I didn't answer. It continued. They'd bring more. A pause. I don't need more. I felt sick. Something scraped against the door. Then it said, "You smell different when you understand." I'm not sure what that means. I'm not interested in finding out. I've decided I'm going through the window. I can't stay here waiting for my phone to die. If I can get outside, I'm running straight toward the nearest neighbor. I'm going to leave this post open and update it if I make it out. If there is no update, assume the worst. I just unlocked the window. The thing stopped breathing. I froze. Nothing. I slowly lifted it. The frame made a tiny squeak. Immediately, the creature laughed outside my door. Oh good, I stopped. Why would it be happy that I'm escaping? That is the only thing keeping me from climbing out. Maybe it wants me outside. Maybe there is something outside. I look through the window. The yard seems empty. Streetlights in the distance. No movement. Then I noticed something near the fence. At first, I thought it was a trash bag. It stood up. There is someone outside. No, not someone. Something that's very tall, too thin. It's facing my window. I shut the window as quietly as possible. The thing outside my bedroom door started laughing again. Told you, I whispered before I could stop myself. What are you? Silence, I realized what I had done. I spoke to it. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then it answered. Hungry, the thing in the yard moved closer. It didn't walk. It just seemed to be closer every time I blinked. The creature in the hallway said, "Not for you." I don't know whether that should make me feel better. My phone is at 3%. I can hear scratching against the outside wall. The tall thing is near the house now. The creature in the hallway suddenly started making those cat hissing noises again. Then it shouted toward the front of the house. Mine. Something slammed into the wall. The entire room shook. The thing outside screamed. I have never heard an animal make a sound like that. The creature in the hallway made the buzzing breathing noise again. Excited, the tall thing hit the wall a second time. Then glass broke somewhere near the front of the house. The creature outside my door ran away. Coin sounds exploded down the hallway. Then styrofoam crunching across the kitchen. There was a crash, a scream. Something heavy hit the floor. Now they're fighting. I'm not kidding. Two things are fighting in my parents' living room. Furniture is being destroyed. I heard the television fall over. Something smashed into the dining table. The forced, cheerful voice yelled, "You're being extremely rude." Then another voice answered. I can barely understand it. It sounds like someone talking underwater. The whole house is shaking. My phone says 2%. I don't know what to do. Part of me thinks this is my best chance to escape. Part of me thinks opening the door while two creatures fight 10 feet away might be the dumbest possible decision. Wait, everything stopped. No movement, no breathing, nothing. I'm listening. One set of footsteps, coins on carpet, slow, coming down the hall. It stopped at my door. I heard something drop outside, a wet sound. Then the voice said, "You can come out now." I'm obviously not doing that. It's dead. Still not doing it. "You're welcome." Nope. Then it sighed. Humans are exhausting. The footsteps moved away. I waited. Maybe 5 minutes. No sounds. My battery somehow went back up to 12%. I don't understand that either. I finally looked through the gap under the door. There's something lying in the hallway. A hand. At least I think it's a hand. It has too many fingers. They're extremely long. Black fluid is leaking into the carpet. The other creature appears to have killed whatever was outside. So here's where things currently stand. My parents' sliding door is shattered. Their refrigerator may no longer have a door. My Taco Bell is gone. The guest bathroom has probably experienced things no bathroom deserves. There is part of an unknown creature lying directly outside my bedroom. And whatever broke into the house first may have just protected me from something worse. I still have no idea whether that makes it friendly. I'm leaning toward no. The living room is quiet. I'm considering calling the police now, but if they arrive and the first creature is still here, I don't know what happens. And I'm definitely not opening this door until I know where it is. Wait. I just got a text. Unknown number. There's no message. Just a photo. It's a picture of my parents' kitchen. Taken right now. I can see the broken refrigerator, the destroyed dining table, and in the reflection of the microwave, something is standing behind whoever took the picture. Tall, thin, the creature from outside. Except I watched it get killed. There's another photo coming through. It's my hallway. My bedroom door is at the end. The picture was taken from the living room. Another one. Closer, another, closer. I can hear the coin sounds again. But they aren't coming from the hallway. They're coming from inside my bedroom. My phone is at 1%. I'm turning around now. If this posts, please tell my parents I'm sorry about the fridge. And someone please figure out whether Mickey Mouse wears socks, because apparently that might be important.
Just beyond the headlights. Back in 2010, I was in my first year of college and working at Taco Bell to help pay the bills. It wasn't glamorous, but I enjoyed the job, mostly because of the people I worked with. One of them was my manager. Over time, we became good friends, and we're still friends today. Around that time, his truck finally gave up on him. It completely broke down, and until he could get it repaired, he didn't have a way to get home after our late shifts. Since we usually closed together anyway, I started driving him home whenever we worked the closing shift. It became part of our routine. We'd finish cleaning the restaurant, lock everything up, climb into my car, and head out through the quiet streets while everyone else seemed to be asleep. Most nights were uneventful. We'd talk about work, college, random life problems, or whatever happened to be on the radio. One station we listened to quite a bit was Coast to Coast AM. If you've ever listened to it, you know it covers all kinds of unusual topics: ghosts, UFOs, unexplained sightings, conspiracy theories, and pretty much anything mysterious. Whether we believed everything we heard or not, it was entertaining, especially during long drives home in the middle of the night. One particular night still stands out in my memory. We had just finished closing the restaurant and were driving through a suburban neighborhood on the way to his house. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning. The streets were completely empty. There were no pedestrians, almost no traffic. The most of the houses were dark, and the entire neighborhood had that strange stillness that only seems to exist in the early hours before dawn. Because the roads were so empty, I had my high beams on. They stretched far ahead of us, lighting up the road and everything directly in front of the car. We weren't talking much. The radio was playing quietly in the background while we both looked ahead. Then, at almost exactly the same moment, we both noticed something. Just beyond the reach of the headlights, there was the outline of a man. He wasn't standing directly in the road. He was just outside the brightest part of the light, close enough to see clearly but still surrounded by darkness. Neither of us said anything immediately. We were both simply looking at him. As the car continued moving forward, the figure stepped into the path of the headlights. For the briefest moment, I expected the light to fully illuminate him. Instead, he disappeared, not by walking away, not by running, not by moving behind a tree or another car. He simply wasn't there anymore. One instant he was visible, the next instant there was nothing. The road ahead was completely empty. I instinctively glanced over at my manager. At the exact same moment, he turned and looked at me. Neither of us needed to ask the obvious question. The expressions on our faces answered it. We had both seen the same thing. There was a long second where neither of us spoke. It wasn't because we were too frightened to talk. It was because we were silently confirming that the other person had witnessed exactly what had just happened. Finally, one of us asked something along the lines of, "You saw that too?" The answer came immediately. Neither of us had imagined it alone. That was the part that stayed with me. If I'd been by myself, I probably would have convinced myself there was a perfectly ordinary explanation. Maybe I'd mistaken a shadow for a person. Maybe fatigue after work had affected my perception. Maybe the lighting had created some strange illusion. Driving late at night after a long shift can certainly play tricks on your eyes. But I wasn't alone. My manager looked up at exactly the same time I did. He watched the figure enter the headlights. He watched it disappear. We both reacted independently, before either of us said a word. That made it much harder to dismiss. The strange thing is that the experience itself wasn't dramatic. There wasn't any loud noise. The figure didn't approach the car. It didn't wave. It didn't speak. Nothing chased us. There was no overwhelming sense of fear. It was almost absurdly simple. A man-shaped figure standing just beyond the reach of the headlights. A step forward. Gone. It almost felt like someone playing a game of peekaboo. 1 second there. 1 second not. We kept driving. There wasn't much else we could do. I don't even remember whether we turned the radio down afterward. I mostly remember replaying the image in my mind while trying to understand what we'd witnessed. The roads remained empty. Nothing else unusual happened during the drive. I dropped my manager off at home and eventually went back to my own place, but I found myself thinking about it long after the night had ended. Over the years, I've had plenty of other experiences that people would probably describe as paranormal. Some of them were stranger. Some were much creepier. A few were far more difficult to explain. Yet this one has always stood out for a different reason. It was so straightforward. There wasn't much room for interpretation. We both looked up. We both saw the same figure. We both watched it disappear. That's it. No complicated sequence of events. No uncertainty about whether I'd been alone. No delayed realization. It happened in front of both of us at exactly the same time. Because of that, it's probably the easiest experience I have when someone asks why I sometimes hesitate before dismissing stories about unexplained sightings. I'm still a fairly rational person. I think there are usually ordinary explanations for extraordinary claims. People misinterpret shadows. Fatigue affects perception. The human brain naturally tries to recognize familiar shapes, especially in poor lighting. I know all of that. Those explanations make sense, and maybe one of them applies here too. It's entirely possible. At the same time, I can't ignore the fact that there were two of us in the car. Neither of us suggested what we'd seen before the other reacted. Neither of us had time to influence the other's memory. We simply looked at the same spot, at the same moment, and watched the same impossible thing happen. I still don't know what it was. Maybe there was a perfectly ordinary explanation hidden somewhere in the darkness that neither of us noticed. Maybe our brains briefly interpreted the same visual information in the same unusual way, or maybe it was something I'll never be able to explain. I honestly don't know. All I know is that whenever I think back to those late-night drives after closing Taco Bell, I remember the quiet suburban streets, the empty roads stretching ahead beneath the high beams, coast to coast and drifting softly through the speakers, and that lone figure standing just outside the light. For one brief moment, it seemed completely real, waiting at the edge of the darkness until the headlights finally reached it. Then, as if someone had simply erased it from the road, it vanished without a trace. It wasn't the strangest thing I've ever experienced, and it certainly wasn't the scariest, but it remains the clearest, simplest, and hardest to dismiss unexplained sighting I've ever had.
A week ago, my mother brought an old chair to my house and told me to clean it. That sounds normal enough, I know. At the time, I didn't think there was anything strange about it. My mother had always liked old furniture. She believed almost anything could be cleaned, repaired, polished, and sold for a decent amount of money if you were patient enough. The chair looked ancient, not just old-fashioned. Ancient, the wooden frame was dark and scratched, and the fabric had faded into a color that was somewhere between brown and gray. Dust had settled deep into every seam. The backrest was tall, and the wooden arms curved outward in an elaborate style that people probably considered beautiful 100 years ago. Personally, I thought it looked creepy. Clean it properly, my mother told me. Clean everything. Once it looks good, we can sell it. Where did you even get this? It belonged to Grandma. I looked at the chair again. It looks older than Grandma. My mother laughed. It probably is. Then she left. I dragged the chair into my bedroom because that was where I had the most space to work. Looking back, that was probably my first mistake. I spent most of the afternoon cleaning the easy parts. I wiped down the wood, brushed dust out of the fabric, and tried to remove some old stains from the seat. The chair smelled strange. It wasn't exactly mold or dampness. There was something underneath those smells, something slightly sweet and rotten. Still, it was old furniture. Old things smelled bad. I didn't think much about it. By evening, I was tired, so I decided I would finish the deeper cleaning the next day. I left the chair near the opposite side of my room. That night, I got into bed, watched videos on my phone for a while, and eventually fell asleep. I don't know what time I woke up. I only remember opening my eyes with the strong feeling that someone was watching me. You know that feeling when you wake suddenly and before you have even fully opened your eyes, your body already knows something is wrong? That was what happened. I stayed still for several seconds. My room was dark, but some moonlight came through the window. I slowly looked around. The door was closed. Nothing near the window. Nothing beside the bed. Then I looked at the chair. Someone was sitting in it. At least that was what I thought. There was a dark shape there, barely visible. A person. It seemed to have its legs crossed, one resting over the other. Its upper body leaned slightly backward. And it was facing me, watching me sleep. I stopped breathing. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then I reached for the lamp beside my bed and switched it on. The room filled with light. The chair was empty. I stared. Nothing. No person. No clothes thrown over it. Nothing that could have created the shape I had seen. I looked around the room again. Okay, I whispered. Maybe I had still been half asleep. I turned the lamp off. The chair was empty now. At least, I couldn't see the silhouette anymore. Eventually, I managed to fall asleep again. The next morning, the experience seemed almost stupid. It was probably a dream. Maybe sleep paralysis. Maybe the shape of the chair itself had confused my tired brain. I went back to cleaning. This time, I wanted to remove the seat covering so I could clean underneath it. That was when I found the first strange thing. A folded piece of paper. It had been pushed deep between the fabric and the wooden frame. I pulled it out. It was a child's drawing. There were 3 people standing beside what looked like a house. One was much taller than the others. The tall figure had been colored completely black. I stared at it for a moment, then put it aside. Old furniture sometimes had weird things hidden inside. Then I found another drawing, and another. Some showed houses, some showed people. One showed what looked like a woman sitting in the chair. Then I found hair. A thick little bundle of long, dark strands tied together with thread. I immediately dropped it. What the hell? I grabbed some gloves before continuing. A few minutes later, I found something even worse. Small, hard white objects. At first, I thought they were pieces of old plastic. Then I picked one up. A tooth. A human tooth. Small enough that it probably belonged to a child. My heart started pounding. There were several of them. I stopped cleaning immediately and called my mother. She answered after a few rings. Mom, where the hell did you get this chair? I told you. It belonged to Grandma. No, I mean before that. What are you talking about? I found things inside it. What things? Children's drawings. Hair, teeth. There was a short silence. Then she said, they're probably not teeth. They look exactly like teeth. It's an old chair. There's probably all kinds of junk trapped inside. Mom, who keeps hair and teeth inside furniture? You're overthinking it. I'm serious. Just keep cleaning it. Then she hung up. I stared at my phone. Something about her answer bothered me, but I didn't know what. Maybe she simply didn't believe me. I should have stopped there. I should have carried the chair outside and left it on the curb. Instead, I kept going. I took it into the yard and used a pressure washer to clean the fabric and wooden frame. Dirty water poured from it for several minutes. I washed every part I could reach, then left the chair outside in the sun to dry. That afternoon, my dog Johnny wandered over. Johnny was my favorite animal in the world. He was friendly, stupid in the best possible way, and completely convinced that every person he met wanted to be his friend. When I looked outside, he had climbed onto the chair and was sitting on it. Johnny, get down. He looked at me. For some reason, he didn't move. Come on. I walked over and pulled lightly on his collar. He suddenly growled. I froze. Johnny had never growled at me before. Not once. His eyes remained fixed on the chair. Then, almost immediately, he seemed to come back to himself. He jumped down and ran across the yard. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe something in the fabric smelled interesting. Once the chair dried, I carried it back into my bedroom. It felt heavier than before. I remember thinking that maybe some water was still trapped inside. That night, I went to bed. At exactly 3:56 in the morning, I woke up. A woman was standing beside me. She looked about 30 years old. At least I think she did. She wasn't fully solid. She looked like a shadow that had somehow become darker than the room around it. Her hair hung around her face. In one hand, she held a knife. I tried to move. Nothing happened. My entire body was frozen. Sleep paralysis. That was my first thought. I had experienced it once before. It had been terrifying, but harmless. That explanation calmed me slightly. The woman whispered something. I couldn't understand most of it. Then I heard one sentence clearly. "You'll find out everything soon." What the hell am I going to find out? I wanted to say it aloud. I couldn't. The woman moved closer. Then she sat on the edge of my bed. The mattress actually sank beneath her weight. That was when I started doubting the sleep paralysis explanation. She placed the flat side of the knife against my leg. Slowly, she moved it upward. I could feel the cold metal. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to move again. Nothing. Then I realized something. My legs weren't simply paralyzed. They were being held down. I looked toward my feet. Large iron nails were driven through my legs into the mattress. One through each ankle. My wrists, too, nailed to the bed. I began struggling violently. Pain shot through my arms and legs. The woman smiled. Then she lifted the knife. No, this time I managed to speak. She raised the blade over my chest, then drove it downward. I felt it enter me, a deep, burning pain. I screamed and woke up. I sat upright instantly. Morning light was coming through the window. The woman was gone. The nails were gone. The knife was gone. I breathed hard. Dream, I said it several times. It was just a dream. Then I moved my left foot. Pain, I looked down. There was a mark on my ankle, a small circular scar. I checked the other one. Same thing. Then my wrists, marks there too. My hands started shaking. Finally, I pulled up my shirt. A thin scar ran across the center of my chest, exactly where the knife had entered. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at myself. There was no possible way those marks had been there before. I knew my own body. The chair was reflected behind me. For a second, I thought I saw the woman sitting in it. I turned. Empty, that was enough. I decided the chair was leaving. I grabbed both wooden arms and tried to lift it. It didn't move. I pulled harder. Nothing. It felt as if it had been bolted to the floor. I checked underneath. No screws, no nails, nothing holding it down. Still, I couldn't move it even an inch. I decided I needed tools. I went outside toward the garage. Then I saw Johnny. He was lying in the middle of the yard. At first, I thought he was sleeping. Johnny? No movement. I walked closer. Then I stopped. He was dead. I won't describe everything. I can't. There was blood everywhere, and his body had been badly torn open. I stood there, unable to breathe. For several seconds, my mind refused to accept what I was seeing. Then I started crying. Johnny had been perfectly healthy the day before. Nobody could have entered the yard without me hearing the gate. And somehow, I knew. The chair, the woman, whatever I had brought into my house. I buried Johnny behind the garage. It took almost an hour because my hands were shaking so badly. By the time I finished, sadness had turned into anger. I went into the garage and grabbed an axe. That was when I saw the writing. 3 words had been scratched across the garage wall. Next is you. I dropped the axe. That was the moment I finally admitted I couldn't deal with this alone. I searched online for someone who claimed to deal with paranormal activity. Most of the results looked like scams. Eventually, I found a man who called himself an exorcist. His price wasn't too high. At that point, I didn't care whether he was legitimate or not. I called. He came that evening. He wore black clothing and carried a bag filled with religious objects. I explained everything. The chair, the woman, the scars, Johnny, the message. He listened quietly. Then he walked through the house. When he reached my bedroom, he stopped immediately. His expression changed. There is something here. No kidding. He pulled out a large old book that looked like a Bible and began reading prayers. Then he took out a small bottle of water. He whispered over it, mixed some kind of powder inside, and walked through the house, sprinkling it in every room. Before leaving, he gave me a cross. Keep this close. That's it? If you see anything strange, show it the cross. I looked at him. You're leaving? The house is protected now. I didn't feel protected. Still, that night I placed the cross beside my bed. I also kept the axe there, just in case. At exactly 3 in the morning, I woke to footsteps in the kitchen. Slow footsteps. Then a scraping sound. Metal against metal. Someone was sharpening a knife. I sat up. The scraping stopped. Footsteps moved toward my bedroom. I grabbed the axe in one hand and the cross in the other. The door slowly opened. The woman stood there. Same dark shape, same knife. I raised the axe and swung. The blade passed straight through her body. No resistance. Nothing. I swung again. Same result. She smiled. Then I remembered the cross. I pointed it toward her. The effect was immediate. She dropped to the floor. Her body twisted violently. A terrible howl filled the room. It didn't sound human. The walls seemed to shake with it. For 1 second, I thought I had won. Well, that's it, I whispered. Then she moved faster than I could react. The knife flashed. Pain exploded in my leg. I looked down. Blood was pouring from a deep cut. I ran. I didn't even put shoes on. I grabbed my car keys and got out of the house. I drove myself to a clinic. They cleaned and stitched the wound. Thankfully, the damage wasn't serious enough to affect my leg permanently. I refused to go home that night. I slept in my car in the clinic parking lot until morning. When the sun came up, I convinced myself I had to return. Maybe daylight would make things safer. Maybe the cross had weakened the spirit. Maybe I could finally destroy the chair. I drove home. The front door was partly open. I knew immediately something was wrong. Hello? No answer. I stepped inside. My brother was lying on the floor. Dead, his body had been mutilated. His hands had been badly cut. His eyes were damaged. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Then I saw the note sitting on the dresser. If not you, then your brother, then your mother. I called the police. They asked questions I couldn't answer. Why was my brother there? I didn't know. Had he been staying with me? No. Did I know anyone who wanted to hurt him? No. The official cause of death was a stab wound. That didn't surprise me. Nothing surprised me anymore. After the police left, I hung the cross directly above my bed. I was terrified of sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard screams, sometimes footsteps, sometimes the sound of a knife being sharpened. Then I saw her again. She was sitting in the chair. This time, she was wearing glasses. I have no idea why. Maybe she was mocking me. She crossed one leg over the other and looked toward the cross above my bed. Then she smiled. Do you really think hanging that over your bed will help? I jumped up. She disappeared. That was enough. I grabbed my keys and drove to my mother's house. She opened the door looking confused. What happened? The chair's cursed. She stared at me. I'm serious. Something comes to me every night. Slow down. It killed Johnny. It killed my brother. It stabbed me. My mother's face changed when I showed her the scars, the marks on my wrists, my ankles, my chest, then the fresh wound on my leg. For the first time, she seemed to believe me. She sat down. There is something I never told you. I waited. She looked uncomfortable. Your great-grandmother was interested in occult things. What does that mean? Rituals, spiritualism, things like that. And the chair belonged to her? My mother nodded. Possibly, possibly. It was in the family for generations. I stared at her. And you gave it to me? I didn't know. She looked genuinely frightened now. Have you tried calling someone? I called an exorcist. And he told me there was an evil spirit. My mother almost smiled. Very helpful. He gave me a cross. That's all? Pretty much. She sighed. Then call someone better. So I did. This time I found someone with years of experience and enough positive reviews that I hoped he knew what he was doing. He was expensive. I didn't care. When he answered, I said, something paranormal is happening in my house. Another exorcist already tried to help, but it didn't work. You're basically my last option. I told him everything. He listened carefully. Then he said something that worried me. Don't destroy the chair before I arrive. Why? If the spirit is attached to it. Destroying the object before separating the spirit can make things worse. Wonderful. We agreed he would come that night. He arrived around 11. Unlike the first man, he didn't immediately start praying. He examined the chair. He looked underneath it. He touched the wood. Then he quickly pulled his hand away. This has been used for something. What? I don't know yet. We sat in the kitchen drinking tea while we waited. I told him about the teeth and hair. That interested him. He asked if I had kept them. I told him I had thrown everything away. He shook his head. Those may have been ritual objects. Whose teeth? I don't know. I didn't want to know. At around 3:30, the room became cold. The exorcist put down his cup. She's here. I didn't ask how he knew. The woman appeared near the hallway. She wore the glasses again. For some reason, that made her more disturbing. Maybe because it made her look almost ordinary. She looked at me, then at the exorcist. Her smile disappeared. He immediately opened his book. He began reading. The woman screamed. He threw liquid toward her. Smoke rose from wherever it touched. Dark smoke, not normal smoke. It seemed to pour out of her body. She collapsed. Her arms and legs twisted. The house shook. The lights flickered. She screamed in several voices at once. A woman, a child, a man, something deeper. The exorcist kept reading. She tried to crawl toward the chair. He stepped between them and poured more liquid. The scream became so loud I covered my ears. Then the shadow began breaking apart. Black smoke poured upward. The woman's body became thinner. Transparent for a second, I saw other faces inside her. A little girl, an older woman, a man. Then they vanished. The smoke disappeared. The room became quiet. The chair made one final cracking sound. Then nothing. The exorcist closed his book. It shouldn't return. Shouldn't? He looked at me. Nothing is guaranteed. That wasn't what I wanted to hear. He handed me a bottle of the same liquid he had used and a small religious icon. Keep these. What about the chair? Burn it. I stared at him. The other guy couldn't even move it. You should be able to now. And after I burn it, do not keep the remains. What do I do with them? Put them into moving water. The nearest river was about 20 minutes away. After the exorcist left, I went into my bedroom. The chair stood where it had been all week. I grabbed one arm. It lifted easily, almost too easily. I carried it outside. I built a fire far from the house. Then I burned it. The wood cracked. The old fabric curled into black pieces. For several minutes, nothing unusual happened. Then the flames suddenly turned much higher. A horrible smell filled the yard, the same rotten smell I had noticed when I first cleaned it. For 1 second, I heard a woman screaming from inside the fire. I nearly ran. Instead, I waited until everything was reduced to burned wood, ash, and pieces of metal. I collected the remains. Then I drove to the river. It was nearly sunrise when I arrived. I carried everything to the bank. One piece at a time, I threw it into the moving water. The current took the ashes first, then the pieces of wood. Finally, I threw in one of the metal parts from beneath the seat. It disappeared beneath the surface. The moment it did, something changed. I felt lighter. I hadn't realized how tense I had been until that pressure disappeared. For the first time in days, the world felt quiet. Normal, I went home. The house was empty, no footsteps, no voices, no woman, no chair. That night, I slept with every light on. Nothing happened. The next night, I turned off one lamp. Still nothing. A week passed, then another. Everything stayed quiet. The scars remained. The marks on my wrists and ankles are still visible. So is the scar on my chest. The wound on my leg eventually healed. Johnny is still gone. My brother is still dead. Those things cannot be fixed by burning a chair. Sometimes I still feel guilty. I keep thinking that if I had refused to bring the chair into my room, maybe none of it would have happened. Maybe Johnny would still be alive. Maybe my brother would be alive. Maybe the spirit would have remained dormant. My mother eventually told me more about my great-grandmother. Apparently, she wasn't simply interested in the occult. She held meetings. People visited her house at night. There were rumors about seances, attempts to speak with the dead, and rituals involving objects that belonged to children. Nobody in the family liked talking about it. After she died, most of her possessions were sold. The chair was one of the few things the family kept. Why? Nobody knows. Maybe they didn't understand what it was. Maybe somebody did. I sometimes wonder about the drawings, especially the picture of the woman sitting in the chair. Was that the same woman who appeared in my room? Were the teeth hers? Were they from children connected to the rituals? I'll probably never know. I don't want to know anymore. The experience changed something in me. I cannot sit comfortably in old chairs now. If I enter an antique shop, I automatically look at every chair in the room. If one has a tall back and dark wooden arms, I feel sick. I never place a chair directly across from my bed. Ever, even normal ones. If I'm staying at a hotel and there's a chair facing the bed, I turn it toward the wall. People laugh when I do it. I let them. They didn't wake at 3:56 in the morning and see a woman sitting there. They didn't feel a knife against their leg. They didn't wake with scars from injuries that happened inside a dream. Sometimes, very late at night, I still wake suddenly. There is no reason, no sound, no nightmare. I simply open my eyes. Whenever it happens, the first thing I do is look toward the place where the chair used to be. Nothing is ever there. That should make me feel better. Usually it does. But 3 nights ago, I woke at exactly 3:56. I checked the corner. Empty, I almost laughed at myself. Then I heard something, very faint. The sound came from outside the bedroom, a wooden creak, then another. The same sound the old chair used to make whenever someone shifted their weight in it. I stayed awake until sunrise. In the morning, I searched the entire house. Nothing, no chair. No strange markings, no shadow woman, nothing at all. Maybe it was the floor settling. Maybe some part of the house moved in the cold. Maybe once you survive something like this, every harmless sound feels dangerous. I hope that's all it was. Because the exorcist told me the spirit shouldn't come back. Shouldn't. I hate that word. For now, the nights are quiet. I still keep the liquid he gave me in my bedside drawer. The icon is beside my bed. I don't know whether either of them would actually help if the woman returned, but I'm not throwing them away. And I will never bring antique furniture into my home again, especially chairs. People can call that irrational if they want. Maybe it is. But if you ever buy an old chair and discover drawings hidden beneath the fabric, or hair tied together inside the frame, or anything that looks even slightly like human teeth, don't finish cleaning it. Don't sit in it. Don't let your pets near it. And absolutely do not put it in the room where you sleep. Get rid of it. Call someone who knows what they are doing if you have to. Burn it only if you are certain whatever is attached to it has been removed. Because sometimes an old chair is just an old chair. And sometimes something has been sitting in it for a very long time, waiting for someone to bring it back inside.
The broadcast is ending, but some voices do not disappear when the radio goes quiet. Maybe one of tonight's confessions will stay with you. Maybe you will remember it the next time your phone rings at an odd hour, or when you hear something outside after midnight. Leave a comment with the story that got under your skin the most. Subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more stories from the people who called in after something went wrong.